regenerative agriculture is the topic of tonight's talk. So Dan, if you want to bring up your slides and take it away when you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Dorian. Hopefully you can all hear me and do interrupt if you can't. And sorry, I have not updated the new logo. I've kept the old Clifton Climate Action. It only appears twice, but hopefully that's okay with everyone. So welcome to my talk. Thanks for joining us on this lovely evening. I'm just here to really give you all some food for thought around how we can potentially all make better choices around what we eat and how that might be able to help us eat ourselves out of this climate chaos that we are currently in. So just a bit about myself before we get going. I was a zoology graduate at Cardiff. So graduated in 2017, whereby I had a year in Indonesia doing slow loris conservation. So I was following slow loris, which are these cute little primates you can see in that photo at the top right, around the agricultural fields of West Java, monitoring their echolocation, which may or may not be a future talk if that's of interest. But learned a lot around agriculture there. And then I got a job with the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. And I was with them for 3 years as an on-farm conservation advisor, helping landowners make more sustainable choices around their land use types, how they grow food, and how they can really act on this climate emergency that we are currently in. So got to know a load of farmers of all different types, everyone along that spectrum, right from the regenerative agriculturalists all the way through to, you know, more conventional systems. And now I've moved on to work at the Land app, which is a mapping platform enabling landowners to collaborate at a landscape level in joining up their action. So it's still very much in the agricultural conservation sphere, but I've moved to a bit of tech that is hopefully going to facilitate the wider collaboration using the skills that I've learned at FWAG. So what is regenerative agriculture? So obviously everyone knows what agriculture is, and it's just a way of growing your food for all of us to eat. However, they've prefixed it with the words regenerative, and its connotations are mainly to focus on 4 key topics, and that's increasing biodiversity, improving soils and the health of the soils, which I'm going to touch on quite a lot tonight, protecting the wider environment, and enhancing ecosystem services. Ecosystem services is a bit of a key term at the moment, and it basically just means the benefit derived from any one ecosystem. So say, for an example, you've got a woodland, the ecosystem service derived from that woodland can be anything from the carbon it sequesters, the flood water it stops going down into the local village, or the social health and well-being benefit that you get when you walk through a lovely woodland. So every type of habitat can provide ecosystem services, and that includes the habitats which grow food. You know, your arable fields and your grassland fields all can deliver ecosystem services. But what regenerative agriculture tries to do is try and enhance the benefit that they can provide. The way I like to look at regenerative agriculture is it's putting back more than you take. So a lot of traditional farming mechanisms and some of the more degrading farming mechanisms that we have globally take more than they put back. And that means you're taking off nutrients without considering how you're going to replace those nutrients. And what this regenerative movement is doing is trying to train up farmers in putting back more than they're taking off the land. And it boils down mostly to one thing, and that's the health of the soil. Soil health is obviously fundamental to how you grow food. It provides all the nutrients, it provides all the water, it provides the whole substrate for food to grow in. And it's really important for people who are farming to understand whether or not they've got healthy soil. And hopefully this image that you can see on the screen is pretty demonstrative. On the left, you've got rather unhealthy, depleted, dusty soil, which is at high risk of wind erosion, high risk of, you know, leaching, plus the nutrient levels are low. It's biologically dead. However, on the right-hand side, this darker, richer soil is full of carbon, full of life, and full of other living organisms, but also fundamentally full of nutrients and full of water, which provides a good substrate for growing food. So in this regenerative movement, what people are trying to promote is soil health. If you can get your soil health correctly, you have a knock-on effect on so many other things, not leads us to say carbon, for example. So just as a demonstration, and I'll come back onto this a bit later, is roughly on the left-hand side, that soil is made up of about 1 to 2% carbon. On the right-hand side, regenerative agricultural systems can get up to 10, 12% carbon. And if you think about the whole scale, if people increase their hectarage by, 2, 4, 8-fold, if they can, we're sequestering a lot of carbon while we're looking after our soils and providing a better substrate to grow healthy food. So why is soils, what's happening at the moment? This photo is quite demonstrative, is a source from NASA. This is actually taken just after the 2007 floods. And you can see a halo of brown around the United Kingdom, and all of that is soil. That's soil being washed off agricultural fields, that's soil being washed down tracks, through villages, down our drains, and eventually into our estuaries. And the United Nations is estimating that we only have around 60 harvests left before all of our soils are depleted. They're exhausted of nutrients, or most of the nutrients have ended up in the wrong place, in the sea, in the rivers, etc. So fundamentally, what we want to do with regenerative agriculture is promote a way of keeping the nutrients in the right place, and that's making sure your soil structure remains solid, keeping the nutrients in those fields for growing the food. And how do you do that? So for regenerative agriculture, you've got to use beneficial practice. And these are the 4 practices I'm going to talk about throughout, and hopefully give you a bit of an understanding about how choosing to support farmers that are using these beneficial practices over ones that potentially aren't will have a knock-on effect to the benefit that you're having in the wider environment. And those 4 practices are limiting soil disturbance. So you can do this through numerous different ways. When you're drilling the seed, instead of ploughing or cultivating, you can use new tech called ZeroTill Systems, which basically direct drills the seed into soil without having to disturb it at all. And obviously, as well as if you're a gardener, you can also start to use zero dig systems as well. So instead of using a spade to disturb the soil, you can actually just direct drill those seeds into the ground, and that keeps the soil structure. You can also build diversity of the soil through crop rotations. So rotations help maintain soil structure and the nutrient levels, because when you're just growing a single crop time and time again, that single crop has got the same nutrient requirements, the same water requirements, and doesn't give anything back if you just keep depleting it. However, if you rotate crops, so you use a series of different crops through your growing season and through the growing years, those different crops provide benefits. They provide different levels of nutrients, and they require different levels of nutrients. So for example, in your rotation, you can have a nitrogen fixing legume such as clover, which will then provide nutrients to the next plant that's coming in. And that ultimately, that diversity helps improve the soil structure. Also, keeping the soil covered. In a moment, I'm going to show you a really quite clear demonstration of why this is important. But ultimately, by keeping the soil covered throughout the year, you're keeping all the nutrients within, but you're also keeping the carbon in, and you're reducing any erosion, and whether that erosion is through wind or through water, as that previous image just showed. So soils that aren't covered are more at risk of being washed away. And then finally, integrating animals. Traditionally, mixed farming systems were always the thing. They always had livestock included in that system. However, as we've moved towards more intensity, a lot of farms are moving away from animals within the system. And I've got a couple of slides to explain the importance of moving livestock through an arable rotation and what benefits it brings. And what I love about this regenerative agricultural process is there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. There's a lot of farmers almost showing off about what they're doing. And this is just a screenshot on the right from LinkedIn that I just took just a moment ago, where a farmer is, celebrating their regenerative journey, where you can see this is a photo of scoops of soil taken 20 meters apart, but one of them has been under stewardship for the last 20 years, and the other one has been under a conventional system of rotational ploughing year on year. And you can see that just the color difference is made up mainly of carbon and mainly of biota. You got worms, you got bacteria, etc. So the darker the soil, the more carbon that's inside it, and that's how we are fundamentally going to be able to tackle this the climate change that we're facing at the moment. So this is the experiment. I just thought I'd just show this quickly and explain what's going on just for 2 to 3 minutes, because it is really demonstrative of soil and soil health. So there's a good YouTube video. I put the link in the slides, and I'm happy to share these slides afterwards. But this is a rain simulator test where all of the trays 1 to 5 had the same amount of rain pour on top of them. And underneath each of these trays, there's 2 buckets. One of the buckets is collecting all the water that infiltrates down. So you can see in the tray number 1, there's holes in the bottom of the tray. So all the water is going straight through and collecting in the bucket below. And there's a second bucket, which is closer to us in the foreground, which is collecting any water that's running off the top of the tray into the bucket. So moving from left to right, number one is the control tray, there's no soil. Number two is a heavy cultivation system, including bare soil. So this is quite a common sight across the UK and the world, where arable farmers will plough and leave their soil bare through ploughing and disking to try and create a stale seed bed. So they leave it fallow during the winter. Tray number three is where you use less disturbance. So this is a low tillage system. So they do occasionally cultivate, but they are keeping the soil covered. And number four is a fully no-till system, so zero cultivation, plus they also use cover crops. So through the winter, when they're not growing anything, they put in a diverse sward. So they put in a mixture of grasses and legumes, etc., to keep that root structure going. And then number five is the traditional hay meadow. So that's just before any hay is being taken off it. So it's never been cultivated, and it's just got natural plant diversity. What happens once you release all that water and wait until they've all had that 5 minutes up? You can clearly see on the left, tray number one is that, hopefully it's quite faint actually, but all the water is in that back bucket. Nothing is being run off the top because there's no scope for soil wash. Number two, however, is probably the most obvious change, is that all of the water that landed on that field or landed within that tray hit the soil surface and ran off and took all the nutrients with it. And that's what that NASA photo is demonstrating, is the soil had no structure, there was no roots to help the water infiltrate down. So actually all the water came off the top and none of it went through to the water table, which is this back bucket. They're moving across to that a reduced tillage system. Some of the water managed to infiltrate, so the bucket's only half full. However, the water is a bit cloudy, so there was still some runoff, and that runoff still contains some sediment. And then hopefully you're getting the picture now, where actually in number four, I've disturbed the soil 0 times during my arable rotation. So I've done no ploughing, plus I've got lots of biomass on there. I've left the cover in, which means that all of the water infiltrated through the ground and dribbled through into the water table, or our bucket at the back. And also that water is slightly cleaner than number three. So not only is water being permeated and being held within that soil or within the water table, nothing's being washed off, plus it's cleaner water that's going into the water table. And then finally, number five, very similar to number four, where you've got grassland on top. A lot more water is being held by the grassland. So that water is being stored like a sponge, but 0 water is being washed off. And this is just a really nice demonstration of how different land uses and different management of both grassland and arable fields make a difference to how much water and how much soil is being run off. But also, if you think about this in the scheme of natural flood management and stopping flooding, obviously the land use types shown in 4 and 5 are holding more water back because less water is running off or less water is being infiltrated. So maintaining less soil disturbance, ideally none, is part of that regenerative process, where you consider what impact you have when you use a tillage system. There's other ways you can test how healthy your soils are. This is one of my favorites. It's called Soil My Undies, and it's from America. And the concept is, and you're welcome to do this in your own back garden, by the way, or if you've got an allotment, is that you get some 100% cotton underwear and you bury them for 2 months. After 2 months, you bring them out of the ground and you see how degraded they are. The more they've been eaten up, the healthier the soil you've got. And that's simply because the more bacteria you've got in the soil, the more worms you've got in the soil, the more, there's a whole host of little tardigrades, loads of little life in that soil. But if you've got biologically dead soil, those underpants are going to be intact after 2 months. So this is quite a fun interactive way of, showing farmers a tangible thing, how healthy is your soil? So if you want to have a go at home, please do, and send in your photos and maybe get the hashtags off Julie for the socials as well. So I mentioned about how introducing grazing into a system or maintaining grazing can have beneficial practices. And I just wanted to do it in a context of a case study. So this is one of the farmers that I worked with in Gloucestershire, based near Andoversford. And they use rotational grazing within their mixed farming system. So they have Hereford cattle, which are 100% grass fed. So the cattle grown using this PFLA mark, so this is the Pasture for Life certificate, is a mark that they can sell their meat at a premium under, means that every single ounce, every morsel of food that these cattle have eaten has been grown within those four walls of that farm. So grassland management and field management generally is really important to make sure you've got enough food for the cattle. So the cattle are eating 100% grass or pasture, which, as you can see, it isn't just made up of grasses. These pastures are species-rich wildflower meadows, and the cattle are the ones that maintain that sward. And the way they do this is they try and reenact the great African plains, for example, where you've got millions of wildebeest in herds moving across the grasslands, and they spend a day or two eating one patch of grass before they move on, before the wolves, etc. The lions, etc. move in. And what the farmer here does is they mimic that, and they use a system called mob grazing. So when you mob graze, you're basically continually moving your herd across the grasslands. So in this farming system, near Andoversford, the cattle are moved every day and do not move back to the same patch of grass for 3 months. So any one patch of grass has only got cattle on it for 4 days a year, which means for the days of the year that it's not got cattle on it, it can grow, it can pollinate, it can provide habitat, it can infiltrate water into that system. But ultimately, the cattle are the ones that are maintaining that ecological balance. Without the cattle there, you get dank grasses unless you take hay, and traditional hay cutting, by the way, is another way of doing this. So if you aren't you're not eating meat, absolutely fine. However, if you are someone eating meat, the best thing you can do is support the PFLA, or the Pasture for Life Association, which is selling certified beef, but it's beef that's being created in a way that is actually sequestering carbon. And just to explain the carbon sequestering bit, we know in the press that cattle are releasing, methane. However, the way that this grassland is being managed is that the cattle eat a third of the grass. A third of the grass is being trampled down into the soil and rotting down and actually being carbon that's fixed in the soil. And a third of it is left to photosynthesize. So they move the cattle off way before the grass has been eaten. And that actually has a net positive sequester on carbon. And there is lots of research coming out to show it. But that's only, I must reiterate, only in this Pasture for Life system. I'm not promoting beef at all from feedlots in America. I'm just promoting this one type of certification mark, which is 100% grass-fed beef. Also, how else can you work with nature? And this is one of my favorite topics to talk to farmers about. It's called integrated pest management. Everyone knows that there's farmers dealing with pests on a daily basis, but there's a lot of nature that really can help you with your pest control. And that can be anything from, welcoming hedgehogs to walk between your crops and eat all the slugs that you may have, or welcoming beetles and ladybirds to come and eat your aphids. So integrated pest management is becoming more and more of a staple within this regenerative movement, where actually, look, we don't need to rely on pesticides. We've got natural pesticides and they're called hedgehogs, or we've got natural pest control managers, which are called ladybirds, or earwigs in an orchard. All of these things which they went through a point in the 70s and 80s where we just didn't want any wildlife in our land. It was seen as a bad thing, unclean, untidy, but actually they have such a benefit. And I can't actually remember the fact, the amount of slugs that one hedgehog eats in a night is quite impressive. So, dealing with slugs, there's no one better to do it than a hedgehog that's out all night doing it for you. So how do people think about integrated pest management? And the main thing is, their habitat and their resource is fundamentally the most important thing you can do. So when you're planning your landscape, you've got to think ecologically. And this is what a lot of farmers are realizing now, is actually farming is more than just growing food. Farming is being a custodian of your land and understanding who within that landscape, or what, when you're talking about the ecology, who can help you. So this is just 2 demonstrations of how you can change your land to help hedgehogs or beetles, etc. So agroforestry on the left, which is basically just planting rows of trees through your arable field or through your grasslands, of which acts as a hedgehog highway. It acts as a carbon sink. It also sequesters carbon itself. It allows hedgehogs to walk up and down. Plus, it's also providing benefit for the crops. It's providing them with wind protection. It helps hold more water. So these agroforestry systems are really popping up, and places like Poland and Eastern Europe have been using these all the time. They're looking at us like, why haven't we used these? So a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is helping landowners find funding for these agroforestry systems, which is just a really nice way of us meeting the tree planting targets without removing productive land from the system. Another way that you can integrate pests into pest management, into your farm is using things such as beetle banks. And these are basically just mounds of grass running through arable fields that give beetles a nesting spot and somewhere to hide and live, really. So at night, I think it's something around beetles can move about 50 meters into your field to go and eat on the aphids, etc. And then they can come back. So you want a beetle bank every 100, 200 meters across those fields, but it's just providing ecology, a bit of connectivity through your landscape to provide benefits. And what you think about is if you zoom out, and I don't think I've got a nice picture to demonstrate that, but if you zoom out, if we've got 50 farms or 20 farms all neighboring each other, all thinking in this way, connectivity of that landscape is just improved as well, which means your migratory animals or your bats or your birds also have habitats and a food resource because they're eating the beetles. And this whole regenerative movement is just thinking like an ecologist. It's not just about growing food, it's about thinking, how do I benefit from nature rather than trying to fight it all the time? So not everyone likes reading too much. So there are some really good things out there to kind of inspire you around the regenerative movement. This film at the top left called The Biggest Little Farm, I watched it last year, and it follows a couple who buy a mostly desertified, so a Dust Bowl America farm, and they document and diary themselves over 10 or 15 years, and the change within that time span is really quite astonishing. And all they're doing is thinking about soil health, thinking about how they integrate pest management, thinking about their water resource, thinking about rotation. And I would really recommend watching it. It's a bit American, it's a bit cheesy at times, but actually the message is really good. And just about that desertification, if you're into TED Talks, I think this one at the bottom is possibly the best TED Talk out there. It was released in 2013, and it's Alan Savory, who's a Zimbabwean ecologist, just talking about how using livestock as proxies for the lost herds of Africa can actually fight desertification. Really, really good. Do take time to educate yourself on the importance of herbivores in an ecological system. A couple of other ones, Sacred Cows, a similar principle where actually, there's an ethical case for having cows as long as they're managed correctly. And then finally, Kiss the Ground, which is Woody Harrelson's Netflix show that just came out earlier this year, talks about the importance of soil health, the work that farmers are doing across the world, really, to try and sequester as much carbon as possible. And I've put a couple of links in here because there's some really interesting stats around how much carbon potential soils have. So as I said at the start, that soil on the left had about 1 or 2% carbon, and the soil on the right had 10%, 8, 10, 12%. Actually, they've calculated that there's easily enough scope for, if farmers started working together, to sequester 1 trillion tons of carbon in the next 10, 15 years. And that's just through good practice. So 5 top tips to take away. What we always like about these talks is actually, what can you do tomorrow? I know there's probably not many farmers on the call, if any, but what can you do as a consumer of food? And these are mostly stolen from our friends at the Nature Friendly Farming Network, but they really do get the point across, which is, firstly, just shop locally and sustainably, buy fresh, do research on what's currently in season. Don't try and force food that's not being grown this time of year locally. So support your local shop, your local market, get to know the local farmers in your local area. And I know Bristol's got a number of veg box schemes, for example, that you can get involved with. There is a bit of a premium on them. However, you need to understand the benefit of just paying that little amount more. Work or volunteer on a farm. I've been so fortunate with my time at FWAG and under the likes of Jenny Phelps, etc., to be able to walk on farms day in, day out and speak to farmers. But for people living in a city, it's quite difficult to find a bit more experience. So go and volunteer. There's a bit of a deficit of farm workers at the moment. I think there was some stats about 80,000 people are short for picking when COVID started. So just go and work or volunteer on a farm and just learn a bit more about how food is grown and how food can be grown well. You can join different public movements. The Nature Friendly Farming one is really good. I'm on their newsletter, and they just give you good news stories about good farmers doing good things. So really do sign up and have a look at that. Wasting food, I think it came up in a previous talk, but a stat that still boggles my mind is that over 1/3 of all food grown is thrown away. If you can, please just save that food, put it in the fridge, put it in an omelette tomorrow, put it in the freezer or share it. If we can, stop wasting a third of food, that actually gives us a third more land to do good things with, whether that's rewilding, which I think might be another talk, or there's so many other things we can use that land, but ultimately we do need to feed ourselves, but just please stop wasting food if you can. And then finally, which is quite a nice one, which is just celebrate local farmers doing good things. So if you do pick up a nice bit of PFLA beef, or you do go to the local organic veg box and pick up some veg, celebrate it, share with your friends that you've done something, well, and be proud that you're supporting good farmers, share it on social media, etc. But my main takeaway is please, there we are, it's come through, is vote with your money. Choose food that represents your ideals. It's so easy to just go to a supermarket and pick up whatever's there, but just be conscious that those decisions actually are basically voting every day. If you vote to buy the Soil Association's organic standard, you're buying into that system. If you go and buy PFLA beef rather than some random beef from Tesco, you're buying into that, you're voting with your money, and more and more farmers will do it if that market demand increases. There's probably only a couple of these that you don't recognize. The leaf one, which is that rather subtle beige leaf one, is actually got a lot of benchmarking in the background. So for a farmer's food to have that label on, they've ticked so many boxes around integrated pest management, about water standards, about renewable energy, about use of pesticides, about coming up with action plans around everything. So if you're there's not many supermarkets at the moment that are stocking it. I know Waitrose are. I was in there yesterday and I picked up some mushrooms that have the leaf mark on. It is quite subtle, but please look out for it. And if you see it, it's got a good standard. But finally, the easiest one is the red tractor, which just means that it's grown in Britain and it's grown to a standard that the rest of the world is, struggling to keep up with, frankly. So the easiest thing for everyone to do is just buy British. If you can't find a local farm that's providing local veg, at the bare minimum, always buy British food. And that's everything from apple juice instead of orange juice. Buy British apple juice rather than orange juice that's grown abroad, because that has a carbon value associated it. And if you're going to, buy veg, buy British, because it's most likely in season unless it's grown in a greenhouse. So look out for that red tractor mark. There are some new marks coming through, and I think they're actually looking towards a green tractor, which I've heard rumblings of, which would be amazing, which is just another level up from the red tractor. But again, we just need to educate people as much as possible. And one little stat I wanted to leave you with here was in the 1970s, 25% of all household income was spent on food, but actually in 2020, as little as 8% is spent on food. People are choosing to spend their income on different things, but actually we're at a time now where you need to consciously spend a bit more on good food because you're supporting a system that we believe in. And finally, just get involved. I put 2 links here. You can donate to FWAG, for example, who are local advisors. It's a charity that are doing really, really great things on farm advice. You can sign up to the Nature Friendly Farming Network, get that newsletter, and use these lovely icons at the bottom to hopefully steer you to make some good choices in the supermarket or at your local veg shop. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to have some questions.
Okay, fantastic stuff, Dan. Thank you very much for that. If you're going to stop sharing, then I will stick my slide back up, and we'll just sort of have it in the background. Okay, great. So yeah, we've had one question in the chat so far, which I can start with. But if anyone else has got more questions, please do get them in there, and we'll start reading some of them out. So the first question is from Nikki. She asked this fairly early in your talk, and I don't think I heard you answer it. A lot of the farmers who are either doing no tilling or low tilling of their land, how many of them would you say are using glyphosate, and are some managing without it?
Yeah, so glyphosate is a tricky situation at the moment. Definitely, a lot of low-till farmers are using glyphosate. However, the more you look at pest management and the use of products like that, the more you can look at the wider picture of the benefits, the pros and cons. Obviously, glyphosate is a horrible chemical, don't get me wrong, and there's some really bad things that's going on with it. However, the benefit that you can have potentially from just and some of the machinery, most of the machinery they're using for glyphosate is so specific, it actually just sprays right to the root. But there are examples of people using the ZeroTill system without glyphosate. I think it's just a case of a bit more education on when and how you can start drilling, when's the best time to do it in terms of reduced weed burden. But it's definitely, I know, I'm not sure what the exact status is at the moment. I think they banned it for a little while and there was some backlash. I just think if they ban glyphosate, I'm just worried that the next new chemical cocktail is going to come up. And I think we've just got to find the balance between what is our focus here. If we can use it to a certain standard and there's more accreditation around the use of glyphosate, I do think there is a place for it because it has real benefits in terms of not needing to plough. For example, for an organic grower to get a stale seedbed, they pass any one point about 2 or 3 times just ploughing in a diesel tractor up and down until those plants have gone. But actually someone with glyphosate will do it on the same pass that they're direct drilling their seed. So they're just going over once. So there's pros and cons to both. And I think in this world of reducing carbon, it up for debate. But yeah, it's a real tricky one at the moment. And it's something that a lot of our farmers are grappling with.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's a tricky one. Julie asks sort of the opposite question, which is what percentage of farmers are actually using good practices?
I don't think anyone's quantified that. And I think the stats you can get online, and there's a lot of free stats online, you can, for example, extrapolate how many people have gone organic. But actually, as I've just mentioned, going organic doesn't necessarily mean you're doing good practice. It's sometimes put a premium on things. So I don't actually know. I know there's definitely a groundswell of farmers joining the movement simply because the mentality has changed from being as productive as possible and therefore selling as much tonnage of wheat for as much as you can. But actually now they're thinking about it from an ecological and economical perspective. Actually, regenerative agriculture reduces your bottom line. So you're paying less for pesticides, paying less for nitrogen fertilizer, you're paying less for this, which actually means your profit is more. Even if you're producing slightly less food, actually your profit margins are higher. So a lot of farmers are seeing that and going, okay, that makes more sense financially. Plus ecologically, a lot of farmers are worrying that actually they won't have any soil left to hand down to their next generation. Yeah, definitely a movement. However, I think at the time of this talk, there's a lot of stress going through the farming community. The basic payment scheme, which is one of the grants from the EU, the Common Agricultural Policy, is phasing out, and they're moving towards a new system. But a lot of farmers are hit a crossroads. Either they intensify, they plough up their margins and they try and grow as much food as possible to cover their costs, or they start looking down the world of ecosystem service, natural capital and regenerative agriculture. And, I think at the moment in my head from people I'm speaking to, it's a 50-50 split. I think we need to make it as attractive as possible to go down the regenerative agricultural route. And that's why I really want you all to go and vote with your money, go and pay a bit more and, support the local grower who is doing the right thing, who has the right marks, whether it's the leaf mark or this soil association mark. So yeah, it's a difficult one. The only thing we can do is just support and share the good news stories that are happening with farmers and make it as attractive as possible to do that.
Mm-hmm. Tom asks, how do you overcome objections from arable farmers who have never managed livestock before, but who are eager to move to a regenerative system?
Very good question. And it's actually a question that comes up quite often. So the keeping livestock is a different skill. It's a completely different kettle of fish to being an arable farmer. But what there are, a lot of farmers are moving down the route where you actually contract graze. So there's sheep farmers out there that are looking for grass to feed on, and there's arable farmers that are looking for sheep to come and eat their grass. So you can actually almost do a matchmaking service. So the National Sheep Association, you can speak to through a number of different farming groups, the NFU, for example, and they can help join up those nervous arable farmers that don't want to look after livestock, or those nervous livestock farmers that don't want to try arable. And actually, if they start sharing their herbivores amongst them, we can do that. But it is a tough one, because I think going down the regenerative agriculture route needs capital investment to start with. You know, an open arable field is not ready for cattle. You need to think about troughs for water. You need to think about fencing, keeping them in. You need to think about this. You need to think about who's the herdsman, and especially if you're mob grazing, you move them off every day and you move them into the next paddock. It is quite high labor intensity, and that's why your PFLA stake is such a high premium. But yeah, I think once we get to, and we're working on it at the moment with the government and a huge number of organizations, is once we actually start to attribute a value of soil carbon through a soil carbon code in a similar way to what the woodland carbon code is doing, I think the regenerative movement is going to take off quicker, because there's a financial incentive. There's more of a financial incentive to go down that route. But yeah, it's not for everyone. And to be honest, I think traditional hay meadows, etc., are sometimes the easiest rather than going down the livestock route.
Okay. We've got a question about the symbols and things on the packaging that you talked about at the end there. The kite marks you recommended, are they on vegetables or just meat? And will they tend to be on veg from small local shops where things are often plastic free, so no packaging, or is that only a supermarket thing?
Okay, so soil association, you can kind of, that's a pretty common mark that you can see, and that the what I'm happy to share my screen again if you want.
Yeah, would that be easiest?
It might be easier just for me to
okay, I'll just
quickly talk through this bit.
Slide down again.
But basically, it's a bit of a mix is the easiest answer. So soil association, which is that mark that means they're accredited as an organic grower, is found everywhere. You know, little corner shops sometimes have soil association. Tesco's, Waitrose, they all host soil association marks. And then this green is the equivalent European organic standard. So these both pretty much mean the same thing. This Pasture for Life mark is off animal products, so it's only off beef products which have been 100% pasture fed. Sheep, you can get 100% pasture fed. You can get milk from that system as well, and I didn't actually mention it, but this mark also means that the herds aren't split up. So in a traditional dairy unit, mothers and baby are weaned almost instantly. Within the pasture-fed system, the milk is actually produced in parallel with the weaning of the young calf. So actually they will stay with their mothers for the first 9 to 12 months. So they're not removed straight away, which means you get less milk, but the quality of the milk is higher. And I think you also can get chicken, including eggs as well. So this is you can get pasture, because in a rotational system, I've been to a couple of farms in Gloucestershire that do this. So they basically have chickens following the cows. So as the cow, so it goes, you crop in a field for a year, you then put down a temporary layer, you then mob graze it. Day one, a cattle are in there. Day two, you have a mobile chicken unit that follows the cows, and they eat all the dung beetles in the cow pat, and also clear up some of that, and then they lay eggs on their way around. So actually chickens are quite a good part of a rotational system, and a lot of farmers are moving towards them because they're cheap and easy to look after as well, and they actually have benefits to parasites, etc.
Amazing.
The leaf mark, which is linking the environment and farming, that is I've never seen that in any small shops. It's mainly in supermarkets, and it's backed mainly by Waitrose, and I think Marks and Spencer's as well also have it. I personally haven't seen it in Tesco. However, I don't really shop in Tesco, so potentially. But the annoying thing about the leaf mark is it's so subtle. It's a very beige color with very few things. I wish I had my here, one of my punnets. But the point about plastic is a really interesting one. Is do you choose the mushrooms that are loose from Spain, or do you choose the plastic wrapped punnet that are from Dorset with a leaf mark on it? I don't know the answer to that question. I would, for the end of this talk, I'd love you to support the local one. And I think people are more and more thinking about that plastic implication. However, if you can recycle it, whether you recycle the punnet with your recycling and take the plastic film to Tesco, who are recycling plastic film now, it's a difficult one to judge. But I would really, as much as possible, back British food as much as you can, if not always. I think you should be able to survive throughout the year without buying any food that's been shipped in abroad.
Okay, Interesting. Yeah, no, I was aware of Pasture for Life beef and lamb. I didn't know chicken was a possibility. So that's
Yeah, go
quite
on their
exciting.
website. There's some really good stuff. And what's great about the Pasture for Life is once you sign up, you pay a membership as a farmer, but they help you market. They help you get to market. So they provide you with a page on their website and local delivery. I think the closest one to us actually is near Swindon, which is Lydia Turkeys. It's the Rumming family. Really, really nice. They do Christmas turkeys as well, which I think are Pasture for Life. So you can buy Christmas turkeys that are also grown using this system.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, we actually had Pasture for Life steaks tonight, and they were absolutely delicious.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, but buy good and eat it less. I think,
Yeah.
it's the way around. Don't eat meat, often, but just when you do, make it as an occasion. It tastes so much nicer as well. I didn't go into the benefits in terms of Pasture for Life, but they've got a lot of stats on the amount of nutrients within it, the types of fat that are in it. If you've got a grain-fed system, the types of fat are so much, less healthy than they are within the pasture-fed beef. So I hope it was tasty.
Oh, so good. We have about once every 2 months or something. So we're following your instructions already.
Perfect.
But yeah, the place on Wapping Wharf called Meat Box. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yes, I've not got it, but I would like to try one day. And they do delivery, don't they?
I'm not sure, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have some more questions because we've got lots coming in. Where was that next one? I think it was from Julie. Yes. Are there government incentives to practice regenerative agriculture, or is this costing farmers?
So there are, in principle, there is. So if you apply for the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, which is the current government funding scheme for doing sustainable things on your farm, there are a number of options that help you steer towards regenerative practice, and that's everything from covering the cost to put up fencing, covering the cost to get seed in the ground for your temporary grass lays, which include those legumes, for example, covering the cost to get water troughs to different parts of the farm. All of those integrated pest management things that I showed you can be funded through the government. However, the way it's structured is it's a 5-year window. So you sign up and then you're stuck within a scheme for 5 years. Whereas a lot of farmers have actually noticed the regenerative journey when they're year 2 of their scheme. So actually they've got 3 more years before they are technically out of the government contract, before they can move on. So you have to be smart and tactical, and that's what people like FWAG do really well, is make sure that before you jump into one of those 5 years applications, is you have thought about that 5 years, planned every year, and made sure that is the right thing to do. So there is funding out there. However, interestingly, actually the private market is where we're looking next for farmers. There's a lot of people looking to fund agroforestry in particular, or trying to improve nature corridors. So Bug Life, for example, have got a bit of funding around their beelines project. So all of these things mean that if we can shape the landscape to grow food in a way that's helping all these other objectives, carbon sequestering and improving pollinator habitat, actually the regenerative journey can be funded quite easily. But it's just a case of helping those farmers find those funding streams. And that's actually what my job is at the moment. I'm just trying to steer through this private market where there's either people's PR budget to market they're doing good things and supporting local farms, or there's actually ones that are buying biodiversity credits, etc., from landowners as well. So yeah, there is funding available, but it's still, a lot of it is still at cost to the farmer. Unfortunately, there's not an easy direct access unless you work closely with some advisors and wangle it.
Okay. I realized I missed one from Greg. Does nature-friendly farming require significantly more labor, i.e. more workers? And if so, how much more?
It depends on what you're growing. I think for an arable system, no. I would say fundamentally not really. If you're driving in a tractor with with the machinery doing it all for you, some of these big estates are actually just 2 or 3 man teams, but they're still managing to put in their beetle banks and have wildflower margins and buffer all their water courses. So no. However, I think it does become more likely when you're a horticultural grower. So if you're growing fruit and veg and you're growing it in a way that's more friendly to farmers and you're using the no-dig system, I do think labor intensity increases. However, I'm not a farmer, I'm not from a farming background, and actually my advice on horticultural land has been minimal, and it's something I'm interested in going to volunteer on. I think I might go and see if St Werburgh's farm or Windmill Hill need a bit of help just to get some experience. But generally, no. I think because a lot of it is, I don't think I touched on there's a difference between land sharing and land sparing. So when you're a farmer, you can either land share, which is working with nature but still growing food, using the rotations that I've described, or you do land sparing, which is like that corner of the field I will give to nature. I will put in a wildflower margin, or I will plant some nice trees, or whatever I'll do. So if you're doing a lot of land sparing, which is reducing your productive land but leaving nature around, actually labor could arguably drop because you've got less land to farm.
Great. Okay, well, I hope that answered your question. We've got about 3 more, so we'll probably wrap it up there unless anyone's got any last minute ones they want to sneak under the line. So Katie wants to ask, if you plant a particular crop into untilled ground, how do you stop the existing plant life and grasses from suffocating your young plants, given even young trees need cleared spots?
Yeah, so the ZeroTill system is a science and an art of which I am only beginning to understand, but different crops behave in different ways. And actually you can intercrop different plants because of the growth rates. And if a lot of the min-till systems, while they're coming through, so the same machinery isn't just direct drilling or slot seeding plants underneath the current crop, it's also crimping and like snapping the stem of the previous one, which reduces growth. So actually there's different mechanical ways of slowing the growth of the crop that was before to give the second one time to grow through. Plus there's also a number of crops, and I think it's oats, that have slight parasitic tendencies to grasses. So if you follow wheat, for example, which is a type of grass with, I think it's oats, and if there's a farmer on here, please correct me if I'm wrong. And but I think it's oats. If you follow your wheat with oats, actually that outcompetes the grass roots, and therefore the wheat slowly dies off while the oats come through. So part of your rotation is you always know which crop follows which crop best. So when you're min-till drilling, you're not just randomly chucking in whatever you need. You are planning 5 years in ahead. I'll put in my winter wheat, and then next year I'll put in my oats, and then I'll follow that with a temporary grass lay. So you just be tactical with what you plant.
Okay. Could you talk a little more about limited soil disturbance? Is tilling destructive?
So tilling is just the process of disturbing the topsoil to give a seed bed for which is good for growth. So tilling, depending on how deep you do it, so you can shallow plough, which is 7 centimeters. When you say destructive, not really. It's obviously having a damage to the top, but naturally in life, pigs rootling around disturb the top 7 centimeters soil, and wildflowers grow in it. However, when you start digging deeper and you're breaking up some of the mycorrhizal fungal connectors, so in a standard grass field, there is all these mycorrhizal fungi that are connected to each other. And by deep ploughing regularly, you're constantly breaking those up. So yes, cultivation can be destructive, but the deeper it is, the worse it gets. However, there is definitely, this sweet spot where actually top 7 centimeters and a bit less, actually there's very little life going on. But the more research they're looking into it is especially around carbons, locking up carbon. By maintaining complete soil, keeping the soil completely intact, you've got less room for any soil escaping as carbon dioxide or as methane. So you're just locking it up, and therefore these zero or minimum tillage systems just mean that top cap of soil is remaining intact, the root structures are staying there, so carbon is staying there as well as all those benefits that I showed with the water. So I wouldn't say it's destructive, but it's better to leave it intact if you can.
Okay. We're about 8 minutes away from past, and I'd really like to try and finish around then. So we just had 2 massive, really excellent questions get asked. So I really want to get to both of those. So I'm not saying keep your answers short, but use discretion. Someone called Joel Salatin in the US has apparently designed some great mobile chicken homes. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but that's certainly something that people can.
I've actually met Joel. I met Joel at the Royal Agricultural University 2 or 3 years ago, and he is a very inspirational chap. So there's a lot of work going into these mobile chicken units, and he's also, a very good plant biologist as well, and understands how soils interact with each other. But yeah, so these mobile chicken units, just for everyone, so as I was explaining just a minute ago, is you can actually put chickens in a rotation where they follow the cows, and so the field left, the cows are in. But obviously the main question is, where do you keep the chickens? Well, weird and wonderful engineers are making these mobile, horse and cart style chicken coops that have solar panels on that automatically detect when the sun rises. So they open up, so the chickens all then get to go out. And then they have a sensor for when the sun goes down, and they actually close the chicken coop as well. And by that time, the chickens have learned to get back in before it closes. So actually, they just need to move the coop there and leave it, and then the chickens can run around. So there's some really cool stuff. And obviously, if you're in that rotation I was describing earlier, which is 1 day for every 3 months, that's, 90 different paddocks. So you need to move the chickens 90 times. So obviously, being mobile is key to that, the success of that system. But yeah, Google it. There's probably some really nice videos about chickens. And I know in the Biggest Little Farm video I mentioned, they love their chickens. The chickens are quite an important role for them.
Great. Okay, how do you stop hay meadows from depleting their soils if hay is being grown and cut and removed and animals are not in the mix?
Yeah, okay. And so the principle of what I'm just about to describe is the same with what we did with our York Place meadow, which is being advertised on the website, by the way. So hay meadows work is because naturally plants fix nutrients as well as using them, right? So they fix carbon through photosynthesis. So they're fixing actual gases into a solid, into sugars, etc., into them. Plus, they're also putting some of that into the soil. So actually, they're not depleting soil as such, but they will be using up nutrients. But the fact that the reason hay meadows are so successful is actually the plants that you get in a traditional hay meadow aren't your typical grasses. They're actually quite delicate wildflowers, as well as these more delicate grasses, which actually thrive better on low nutrient soil. So the way they work is perfect, is that you cut your hay in late July, August, you remove all that nutrient, and therefore you provide these more delicate flowers with the perfect place to grow again, without being outcompeted by those that are potentially rely on high nutrients, like your ryegrass, for example. So the reason they work is the fact that they want low nutrients. They grow a little bit, they can sequester their own carbon and make their own sugars. They grow, they get cut, they get removed. But that whole process is just maintaining a low nutrient balance, which means that none of those more aggressive grasses or other more nutrient aggressive plants, such as nettles and thistles, which are associated with high nutrients, have a chance to grow because they need more nutrients. So actually the hay meadow is maintained in this perfect equilibrium simply because you're constantly at a certain time of year removing nutrients just at the point that the nutrients are going to get too much and start swamping them with grass.
Okay. Okay, so two big important ones here at the end here. So Julie's asked, the issue of only having, was it 60 or 80 harvests left is alarming. Is the government actually doing anything right now to tackle this?
Yes, they are. So the government have rebranded. It's the biggest revolution in agriculture since pre-war times, where they are moving away from this payment per hectare basis to payment for public goods and environmental goods. And it's the new scheme, which is going to be released in 2024, is called the Environmental Land Management Scheme, where instead of farmers getting paid what they currently do, which is about £190 a hectare, plus for those beetle banks, etc., for doing relatively good things, actually farmers are going to be paid for the public goods that they provide. So farmers are going to be paid not on the amount of food they grow, or not on the amount of land that they own, but they're going to be paid on the amount of floodwater they hold, the amount of carbon they sequester, the amount of biodiversity they promote, the amount of connectivity they provide the landscape. Plus, there's some really good rumblings, whether they haven't been confirmed, of payment rates being multiplied if you work together at a landscape level. So if we can get 20 farmers working together, all their payments are times by, 20% or whatever. So I would say the government are doing some good things. There's definitely more things they can do. But the great thing is, a lot of the organizations I'm working with, along with ourselves, are working directly with the government to run trials with different farmers. So many, thousands of farmers are being engaged at the moment in how they want the system to be, how they want it to promote. But it's just about that delicate balance between producing food and then just becoming a nature reserve. And I think the government are treading quite well, but they're not quite acting fast enough. But all of those practices, you know, keeping your soil covered, minimum till drilling, rotational grazing, all of those things are already at the forefront of potential funding opportunities in this new scheme. So it is exciting, and I think we've got some exciting things to come when 2024 rolls around.
And the final question may be related to that, which is that Nikki's asked if you can give us a brief overview of where we are with the agricultural bill. Is it all to be welcomed?
So the agricultural bill is a good thing. It gives us more control on what we do, and it means that we can maintain higher standards. However, the nervousness among farmers is around these trade deals that I think just the other day, Australia seems to have been one of the favorites that we've jumped into bed with, which just means that the carbon value from those products are probably the highest carbon value we're going to have, simply because they've got to come across the world. So I think it's still very much up in the air. I think the bill itself has got some really, really good points in there, and they've obviously listened a lot to the scientists. However, ultimately, it's all going to boil down to money. Who's going to offer the best deal? And I'm still a bit nervous, so I'm not going to really say much more other than I hope they really decide to back British farming, make sure that food that they serve on our table from different countries isn't illegal to grow in our country. So yeah, that's one of the main problems that we've been facing, is actually, so the standards under this red tractor mean that you have to meet a certain standard, but actually some of the trade deals they're looking at, food being imported would technically be illegal to grow in the UK, even though they're allowed to import it, which just means that any farmer trying to meet a standard is instantly being undercut because another country can produce it in a cheaper, quicker way without the added costs. So yeah, do write to your MP, just be active, get involved. There's a lot, just read around the subject, whatever interests you. If it is the trade deals or the agricultural bill itself, there's still a lot on the table. There's still a lot up in the air. So I think the more people that shout about the standards they want to see, the better.
Great. And there we are. That's 8:30. So yeah, thank you very, very much, Dan, for answering all these questions and for your excellent talk. Yeah, go on then. I'll stick my slide back up just for the last few minutes here, just to say, of course, if you haven't already checked out westbristolclimateaction.org, everybody, please do. We've got all of our local and green resources. We've got our Bristol Wild Gardens videos, our Wilder Clifton, well, I guess it's Wilder West Bristol interactive map now, monthly challenges, blogs by Joanna Spears, loads of fantastic stuff on there. You can also donate to us via the PayPal link, which is on the screen right now, paypal.me/Clifton Climate Action. It's the one thing I haven't had a chance to update yet, so we're still using the Clifton Climate Action link, but we'll have that fixed by next time. And speaking of next time, June 9th, it wasn't the 9th, it was the 8th. No, it wasn't the 8th, it was the 9th. God, I'm bad at my job. Why did they let me do this? We're screening a fantastic film. We're going to have some activists from the southern United States who are having all their trees chopped down so that we can burn them to make power. Seems crazy. It is crazy. We're going to talk about it.